Here we go.
Okay.
All right, here we are live once again, Baseball Heritage Museum with baseball historian and author Scott Longert. Scott, thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me, Ricardo. It's a pleasure to be on.
It's a pleasure and honor to have you join us here tonight. We're going to talk about your new offering, Cy Young, an American baseball hero. Biography for young readers. So,
Yeah, sure.
What can you share about the book? How you decided to highlight Cy Young? Why you opted to shoot for a younger demographic?
Oh, of course. Actually, my publisher approached me, Ohio University Press, about doing something for children. They have the Biographies for Young Readers series, and they're interested in doing something about baseball. So they approached me about doing that. At first, I wasn't sure really because I'd never written for children before. All my baseball books for adults, so I wasn't certain. But I thought it'd be a nice challenge and something that would be worthwhile. So I decided to do it. And then the big question came up: who are you going to write on? And I thought about someone probably going back a number of years, but someone who had some name recognition with kids. And I thought about Cy Young and the Cy Young Award, whether a youngster following baseball would know a lot about Cy. I'm sure they probably heard of the Cy Young Award. I thought that would be a good thing to launch from and tell a biography about Cy. So we talked it over, and the idea that he's born and raised in Middle Ohio, we lived and died there, we thought it would be a good thing. So we decided to go for the Cy Young bio.
Yeah, fantastic. Speaking of name recognition, most baseball fans probably know the origins of Cy's nickname, but you want to share with us, how he came about being called Cy?
Sure. His real name was Denton True Young, and as a young boy and a teenager, everybody called him Dent. That was his nickname. In 1890, he got a tryout with the Canton Ball Club in the minor leagues. And he came to the park. He was always a big guy, well over 6 feet tall, 200 pounds. And he came dressed in farm clothes, and nobody was sure what to make of him. So they had him go to the mound and throw some balls to the catcher. And the manager and a couple of reporters and some other people were in the grandstand watching. And Cy cut loose with a couple of fastballs, and the catcher just got out of the way, and they smashed against the wooden bleachers, and after a couple throws, splintered some of the wood. And either one of the players or one of the reporters said out loud, "Look at that young man, he throws like a cyclone." So it became the nickname Cyclone from then on. It got shortened to Cy, and that's how it was. And he liked the nickname. For the rest of his life, he considered himself to be Cy Young, and usually would sign things that way and refer to himself as Cy. And that's the origins of the nickname.
Fantastic. So it sounds like you did a lot of research relating to Cy Young, obviously, to write this biography. What sort of resources, what sort of research did you do to fill this book with such great stories and great information?
Sure. One of the major things was to get his players file from the Hall of Fame. And his is incredibly thick. It's gigantic. And so I sifted through that to get all kinds of info, a lot of biographical information about him, a lot of quotes from him, a few letters here and there sent back and forth, and a lot of things about his later life. So that was invaluable to do, having the player file, which I use extensively for my other books, and that's always a great source. The other thing, again, about him being from Tuscarawas County near Canton, he was born in Gilmore, Ohio. It was easy to take a trip. I think it took about an hour and a half to drive down to Newcomerstown to go to the Historical Society there. And for those who've been there, you know what I'm talking about. They have a wing dedicated to Cy. It's got all kinds of exhibits there, a lot of photos, a replica uniform, bats and other things, and the rocking chair Cy sat in his favorite, his pipes and all kinds of things. And it was just great info there, some letters that he wrote back and forth. So I spent about a day there just making copies of photos and going through some of the printed material and talking to the people there. And then I went to the Newcomerstown Library the next day and looked at microfilm of the old newspapers and got a lot of things about Cy coming home in the off seasons and what he was doing, like going out and hunting with his wife Bobby and other things, and going to Thanksgiving dinner with his friends and help dedicating a hospital. So those two things gave me a lot of information. Baseball, I'm trying to think. He was at Baseball Magazine somewhat. That came out, I believe, about 1909 or 1910. So his career was near the end, but there were stories about him going forward in there. And some other magazine sources, I was able to find things about him and sporting life as well. And that was really all I needed to get a pretty good picture of him.
Fascinating. I want to take a moment and say hi to Louis Romero, all the way from Mexico City. He's joining us from Mexico City right now. Hey, Louis, nice to see you. Nice to have you joining us tonight. We also got Bob Semenak, Reagan Starks, and the one and only Bob Zimmer out there. How's it going, everybody? So your research with Cy Young, did you find anything outside of baseball that fascinated you, struck you extremely interesting, out of the ordinary? Was there anything exceptional besides his pitching arm that you can talk about?
Sure. Well, his one thing, it's related to baseball, which surprised me when I found it, that he was asked by Harvard University to coach their pitchers in the fall, I believe, about 1904, somewhere around there, or the winter actually. So he coached college baseball there, and then the following year at Mercer College. So he worked with pitchers and helped them with their game. And in the meantime, he worked out as well, so he'd be ready for spring training. So that was something that I found out. Probably the other was he was a dedicated farmer. He never gave that up. As soon as the season would end, he might barnstorm a game or two, maybe at the most. Then he would go back to his farm and he would work. He had anywhere from 100 to 150 acres, and he was famous for his skills with an axe. He would chop down lots of trees, chop up the wood. There we go. There's our picture of Cy. And that's after he retired when he was an older man. He was constantly chopping wood.
Out of all the different pictures, out of all the pictures you have in this book, it's probably one of my favorite. It just really humanizes Cy Young, takes him out of the uniform and puts him into something pretty relatable for the average person. You know, just a man chopping some wood for his house. That's a great picture.
Yeah, he considered himself just a regular guy. In his off seasons, he was always home. He rarely went anywhere, maybe a trip or two to Cleveland, but he constantly worked. He raised chickens that he entered into a fair in Youngstown. He had sheep. He grew crops. So he was an active farmer for many, many years, probably up to around 1930 or 31 when his wife, Bobby, passed away. Then he sold the farm and he moved in with his neighbors a little bit down the road, the Benedums. But there he helped around. I'm sure he probably chopped some wood for them well into his 80s. That's the kind of guy he was. He also was an excellent babysitter. When he moved to the Benedum's house, they had a baby daughter named Jane. And because the two, mom and dad, worked out on the farm, Cy stayed home and babysat Jane for a number of years. And he was her companion all the way, I think, through her high school days. As she referred to him as her grandpa, And though he never had children, she was kind of his adopted granddaughter. The two of them had a terrific relationship. So that was really him. He wasn't involved in businesses. Those things didn't interest him. He occasionally would go and visit with some other older ball players and talk shop. And then during the summer, he'd go to old timers games. But basically, people called him Old Cy. He was just hanging around home, working on the farm, and going in town to talk with his neighbors and getting his groceries. And that essentially was him, just a regular guy with one of the great arms of all time, which he constantly would play down.
Spectacular. Sounds like a pretty humble guy then, right?
Oh, he sure was. Yeah, he never drew attention to himself. He was a gentleman, rarely, if ever, argued with the umpires. When he joined the Cleveland Spiders, baseball was a rowdy game in 1890 and 91 in those days, and the Spiders were a very rowdy team. They would fight constantly with the umpires, opposing players, with fans. They'd have brawls on the field. But Cy, from what I read, was never involved. He never was actively involved in that at all. He didn't approve of it, and no matter what, he would stay away and not get involved in anything like that. And the newspapers would laud him for being a gentleman, which most of the ball players were not. They swore quite a bit. They drank heavily and stayed out all hours, but Cy didn't do that. He would be in his hotel room, writing letters home, and didn't engage in that kind of activity. And he refused to play baseball for many years on Sunday. He would waive that when the Spiders were involved in the Temple Cup, trying to win that for Cleveland. But otherwise, he was not a guy that was typical of his era, and he got a lot of praise for that, and kind of set an example for others that you didn't have to be a fighter or swear or drink a lot of beer to be a good ball player. You just had to perform on the field, and that's what he did. No more, no less.
Yeah, I guess arguably you can attribute that to his humble farm upbringing, I would think.
Yeah, I would think so. One thing that really amazed me too, he liked to run on the farm. He believed it was good exercise, and he apparently would be wearing his farm clothes and heavy boots, and he'd run several miles around the farm to keep himself in shape. And we know running is the thing you need to do. So he would get to spring training until he was much older. He put on weight. He would be ready to go from day one, where the other guys would have to sweat off 10, 15 pounds, were completely out of shape, getting pulled muscles, but he was ready to go from the beginning of March to start playing ball and pitching because of his running and chopping wood and keeping in shape.
We got a question from Bob Zimmer. He wants to know when did the Cy Young Award happen and how?
It came about, I believe, a year after Cy's death. The commissioner of baseball, actually, I believe it was Ford Frick, president of the National League at the time, or he may have been commissioner, I don't recall off the top of my head. He wanted to do something for Cy's memory. And it came up an idea that to bring an award to the best pitcher in baseball, and they would name it the Cy Young Award. And originally it went to the best pitcher, just one award, and for both leagues. But then they expanded that to the National and American League. But it came about a year after Cy had passed away, and I'm sure he would have loved knowing about that there was something to honor him. There's something that all pitchers strive for, and really was in Cy's honor that Major League Baseball did this for him.
Dan Boyle wants to know, as great as he was, what kind of salary did he earn compared to other players at the time? Now, Dan, just let you know, if you go out and you get this book, it's in here. But I'm sure Scott Longert will probably want to go ahead. He'll go ahead and share that with us right now.
Sure, I can share that. I think the most money Cy ever made was about $6,000 a year, which at the turn of the century was good money, but he was far from the highest paid ball player. He wasn't someone that would negotiate very hard on his contracts. He believed whatever he got was somewhat fair, and he would accept that salary. Though once on occasion, he would be angry at the owner of the Cleveland Ball Club, Mr. Robeson, and he did hold out on one occasion. They had some salary issues, but I saw one of Cy's contracts for Boston, and I believe it was about 1904, he was getting $6,000. So he may have been one of the better paid guys, but certainly Cobb was making a lot more money than him, probably Mathewson, Walter Johnson when he came along, a few other guys as well, maybe Rube Waddell. But Cy never really made the big money. He just was, I guess you could say, frugal with his money. He didn't throw it all over town. He saved it. One of the things when he signed his first contract to induce him to leave the farm because his father had reservations, one of the guys on the board of the Spiders offered him stock in Cleveland Savings and Loan Association, or Cuyahoga Savings and Loan, and Cy got the stock and kept it to his death. So he got dividends 4 times a year from the stock. And other than that, he really was not a guy that came out rich. There's a fallacy, I believe, that Cy was very poor after his playing days and was broke, that the Benedums took him in out of kindness and he had nothing. I don't think that was quite true. He was getting his stock money. He had saved his money. He didn't have a lot, but he was getting some. And he was honored several times throughout his retirement. He was given money from the Indians and others, and he received war bonds at the time during World War II. So he was probably not in great financial condition, but he did have money for himself. But in summary, he was never a rich man, nor did he ever try and become one. I think he was happy with what he had.
So I think that question segues into my next question would be, I know you can only hypothesize on this, but how do you think Cy Young would feel about the current state of MLB today and the way the contract disputes are hashing out and things are going this season?
I think Cy, you have to take into account his frame of reference, which was early 20th century as compared to now. Like those players didn't expect much, and they would play under pretty lousy conditions. The owners completely monopolized them and manipulated them. So I don't think Cy would have had a tremendous amount of sympathy for the ball players. He would have wanted the game to go on, and certainly I think he would have gladly wanted to play regardless of the prorated salaries. But again, that was his viewpoint from 1900 or maybe 1910. And I think guys from his era would felt the same way, that baseball was most important. You got a salary to play. But again, most guys had to work year round because the salary wouldn't pay all the bills for their family and children. So it's a different time and a different aspect. I don't think Cy would have sympathized greatly with the ball players in this case, but at times, though, we understood owners could be pretty rotten too. There were incidents that went on and on. In 1903, they nearly didn't play the World Series because the Boston owner wanted more of the receipts at the last minute. And Cy stuck with the players on that. Eventually, they reached a compromise. But even then, he understood that the owners weren't the know-all, do-all at the time. In summary, though, he probably would have taken a view of, you guys should play baseball, and that's all there is to it.
Thanks for that. I appreciate that. You mentioned in here when Cy came on with the Spiders, 1895, 1896, they played indoor baseball games, you mentioned. Can you elaborate a little bit? That had me, I was just wondering, where would they play indoor baseball in 1895, 1896?
They usually picked out armories. Most cities had them from from the Civil War and the Spanish-American War. There would be huge buildings with large ceilings to store ammunition and for troops to drill. So there was a lot of room inside. I don't know who came up with the idea of playing indoors. The idea was in the wintertime, you couldn't play outside. Why not do it inside and keep in shape? And that became popular. At times in Cleveland, the early 20th century, I believe they had whole leagues of teams with a lot of major leaguers playing, and became popular. I think the ground rules, were the same as always. I think if a ball hit the ceiling, there was some kind of ground rule with it, and the rules stayed the same. You probably didn't slide or anything like that, but it was something I think people enjoyed, and folks like to come and watch them play even in the wintertime. So that became quite a popular fad for the 1890s and well into the early 1900s. I think maybe through 1910, 1915 or so, it faded away. But that was a popular way to keep playing ball, is the guys generally just love playing the game. And whoever came up with the idea, it was brilliant at the time. Why not keep playing indoors? We can find facilities, let's do it and stay in shape. So Cy would do it sometimes. Most of the Spiders played, and I know in the early 1900s, some of the guys like Chief Zimmer catcher. He would play. Bill Bradley from the old Cleveland Naps played indoor ball. And sometimes he'd get his teammates to play a game with him that was important. So a lot of guys were exposed to it. And really, you think about it, that football wasn't really in the form it is, not even close to today. So there wasn't pro football or pro basketball. I think hockey was somewhat around, but in its infancy stages. So you didn't have a lot of diversions in the winter. And for something, if you really were a sports fan, you had indoor baseball to go to and watch. I think that filled a need that people wanted to have. And for a while, it served its purpose.
Thanks. That clarifies things a lot. I appreciate that. Steve Crott wants to know, can you talk about Lou Krieger, who caught many seasons for Cy?
Yeah, Lou was Cy's catcher. The two of them had like a symmetry to them, that Lou knew exactly what to call and Cy would deliver. Cy would say on more than one occasion that he rarely ever shook a sign off from Lou because he knew what to throw. He wasn't a big guy at all. I think he was a guy who was like under 5'10", if I remember, about 160 pounds, but a very tough guy, very durable. He could handle Cy's blazing fastball and able to do that without breaking his hand, which is a difficult thing to do as Cy threw the ball so hard. But a bit later, he was throwing curveballs and some other things. And so, but Lou was an excellent defensive catcher. Everybody recognized that. He didn't hit for much, but if you wanted a guy behind the plate that could throw out base runners and call an excellent game, if you want to talk about framing, I'm sure Lou did a lot of that too. He was really highly sought after. Cy had the good fortune of playing with Lou in his last few days with the Spiders. And then when Mr. Robeson decided to buy the St. Louis franchise and ship everybody there, he shipped Lou to St. Louis. So Cy had him there. And when the American League came about, Lou jumped to Boston, and it wasn't a stretch for Cy to do the same thing and play with Lou. I'm guessing that, without looking at the book, they played together for about maybe 10 or 11 years and were great friends off the field. Lou got sick several times. He had tuberculosis. He lived in Indiana. And Cy and his wife, Bobby, came and spent several weeks with Lou, helping out his wife and making sure Lou got better, which he did. Another time in Cleveland, Lou had apparently an appendicitis. He had really bad stomach pains, was feeling awful, and Cy got him to a doctor right away, and it was discovered the appendicitis, and they were removed. So the two of them were very, very close friends. Probably one of my favorite things is Lou had some major health problems by the time the 1920s rolled around. He had the tuberculosis issue, and I believe he had a leg amputated as well. So he was not doing well physically and financially. So an all-star game was organized in Boston in the late 1920s. Cy by then was already closing in on 60, but he came to Boston and he pitched several innings, and they drew a fairly big crowd, and all the receipts went to Lou and to his benefit. So Cy would never forget his friends, especially Lou, who was his best pal. He made sure he did something to help him out all those years. So they had a very special relationship. But fortunately, I was able to contact some relatives of Lou, and they shared a few stories with me and sent me some photographs. And I learned a lot more about Lou, who was quite a guy in his day. And I think he doesn't get his recognition today because he didn't hit well at all. He was a 200 to 220 hitter, and being a probably short without a lot of power. But defensively, he was regarded as one of the best in his time, and he probably helped Cy win a number of ball games with his pitching calls and the signals that he gave, and helping Cy through some tough innings. I hope that answered that.
I think so. I think Steve will be happy with that answer. Want to just say hi to Sandy and Delinda, who just joined us. Thanks for joining us tonight. Just one more question I have is, do you have any other player biographies on deck? Targeted for the younger readers?
I've taken a break from the young readers. I'm working now on the final part of my trilogy on Indians history. My first book was on the late 20s to the mid 1930s. No money, no beer, no pennants, no money. And then I followed that up with Bad Boys, Bad Times, taking the ball club up to the start of World War II. And currently I'm working on the final part of it to take the team through World War II up through the 1948 season, the playoff, and through the World Series. So that's going to be my next work. I'm actually about 2/3 of the way through it, because staying at home now all the time, I decided to dedicate myself to writing. I'm writing about every day. So I've got about 200 pages done. I anticipate finishing in September and sending it off to Ohio University Press, and then getting a maybe out next spring if at all possible. After that, I don't know, but I'd like to return to the children's series and write another book for kids. I think it's a good thing to help them along who want to learn about baseball and history at the same time. And I think that's something that's needed now. I think for all children to learn more about our American history and how baseball played in that and how it related to it. So I may be doing that down the road, but that's probably maybe a year away at the earliest.
Well said. I couldn't have said it better myself. I want to thank you for joining us tonight. I want to say thank you to Cuyahoga Arts and Culture for helping us produce this Facebook Live event. Thanks to the Baseball Heritage Museum for supporting what we do. And I want to remind everybody that the Baseball Heritage Museum is now open on Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. So you can visit baseballheritagemuseum.org for any updates. You can follow us on Facebook or Instagram. Scott, I know your book is available on Amazon.com. That's where I got my copy.
Yes.
Can we get it anywhere else?
Yeah, right now, I believe Barnes & Noble, but only online. I guess there's an issue with getting books and getting them shipped. Also, Books by the Billion, I believe, online, you can get it. And I think some of the independents are stocking it, or you can order from them. But I did find out today that the hardcover just shipped into the distributor, and those will be going out to selected areas in the next few days, so that'll be available. But I think Amazon scooped up the majority of the first printing, so they're the ones who have the best supply. But online, you can find them, and I'm hoping if and when things start to get back to somewhat normal, all the bookstores will be carrying it. It'll be easy to acquire. But online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books by the Billion, I think are your best bets to pick up a copy.
Great. That sounds excellent. I can only highly recommend reading this book. It's excellent. Thanks again, Scott, for joining us tonight. And hopefully we'll see you next spring, maybe sooner, talking about your final chapter in your trilogy.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. That'll be a lot of fun. That would be great. And thank you so much, Ricardo, for having me on.
Anytime. Have a great night, Scott. Take care.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us. See you soon.